Today we'll be discussing the female genital system pathology, and we'll be dealing with mostly the questions important for the undergraduate MBBS examinations. In the female genital tract pathology, we'll start with the vulva pathology. Bartholin's cyst and abscess is an important question. So we'll start with the definition. What is Bartholin's cyst? It is one of the cyst formation in one of the glands in the vulva that's called as Bartholin's glands. Okay, so any inflammation of the Bartholin's vulvovaginal glands leads to abscess or cyst formation. Mostly the infection is gonorrheal infection caused by Neisseria gonorrhea. It is divided either into acute and chronic types. Acute Bartholin adenitis means adenitis in the sense inflammation of the gland. Acute Bartholin adenitis is defined as obstruction and dilatation of the duct leading to abscess formation. It presents with swelling, fluctuant mass and pain. Microscopically, what we see is a picture of an abscess. So what do we see in acute suppurative inflammation? So it's nothing but pus contents, mostly necrotic debris, neutrophils. Along with that, we see edema, hyperemia and epithelial degeneration of the gland. Chronic Bartholin's adenitis is repeat attacks of less severe acute inflammation and incomplete resolution of the infection. Here we get a cyst called as Bartholin's cyst, which becomes fluid filled. So whenever the gland is filled with fluid due to repeated infection or inflammation which is of a low grade, that leads to formation of Bartholin cyst. This Bartholin cyst is 3 to 5 cm in diameter. It is palpable but it is asymptomatic. Microscopically, we have a cyst which is lined by transitional to flattened epithelium. Subepithelially, chronic inflammation and mucus acini will be seen. So what is condyloma acuminata? Condyloma acuminata or anogenital warts are benign papillary lesions of squamous epithelium. This can be transmitted venereally, that is through sexual activity, to male sex partners. It is a solitary lesion, but more frequently it can be multiple. The common locations are anus, perineum, vaginal, vulva and the rest of the vaginal wall. Now the thing is, since it is a wart, some virus is associated with it. So what is the virus associated with condyloma acuminatum? It is human papilloma virus. Which types? Types 6 and 11. So these are the benign types. You can say these are the types which causes benign lesions of HPV. Microscopically, we see tree-like proliferation of stratified squamous epithelium showing marked acanthosis, hyperkeratosis, parakeratosis, papillomatosis and perinuclear vacuolization of epithelium called as coilocytosis. Condylomas are benign lesion and regress spontaneously except in immunocompromised individuals. So here the human papillomavirus enters the squamous epithelium and manifests and lodges and replicates into the squamous epithelium. This virus will cause some cytopathic effects on the squamous cell, causing the change in the appearance of the squamous epithelium, mostly in the form of a finger-like projection, which will be clinically seen as a wart. Now if you take this picture as a normal squamous epithelium, and this is the stratum corneum represented by SC, then the stratum granulosum which has squamous cell with the granules, then comes the stratum spinosum and stratum basale. This is the papillary dermis. and the next underlying is the dermis. Now, in condyloma acuminata, there will be acanthosis. Acanthosis is nothing but thickening of the squamous epithelium. Along with that, there is hyperkeratosis, that is thickening of the stratum corneum. There is also cytopathic effect on the stratum spinosum cells, which is also called as squalocytic change. This squalocytic change is because of a halo-like appearance around the nucleus, that is called as perinuclear halo, and the nucleus will appear as a shrunken resin-shaped nucleus. These are the effect caused by human papillomavirus on the stratum spinosum cells. Along with that, you can have parakeratosis as well. Extramammary Paget's disease is a rare condition which is similar to Paget's disease of breast. The affected skin most often is on the labia majora and appears as map-like red, scaly, elevated and indurated area. Mostly this is confined to the epidermis, but rarely it is associated with underlying adenocarcinoma. Microscopically, the epidermis and adnexal structures of the vulva shows presence of large, pale carcinoma cells lying singly or in clusters. Cells have halo around it which stains PAS positive. So this is the skin of the vulva showing lining by keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. Now this epithelium is showing hyperkeratosis, that is thickening of the stratum corneum along with prominent stratum granulosum. In the stratum spinosum, here we see large pale cells which are infiltrated singly into the epithelium. Sometimes in clusters also we see, but mostly majority is singly scattered in the epithelium. Unlike Paget's disease of breast, in which case there is always underlying ductal carcinoma, extramammary Paget's disease is confined to epidermis in most of the cases. Prognosis is good if there is no invasion, but sometimes it may progress to invasive carcinoma as well. Now coming to the female genital tract, the cervical part of the female genital tract. Cervical polyps is found in 2 to 5% of adult women and produce irregular spotting. It is a localized benign proliferation of endocervical mucosa protruding through the cervical os. Grossly, we see a small bright red fragile growth, mostly pedunculated, and rarely it is sessile. Microscopically, we see a polypoid tissue lined by endocervical epithelium on all sides. Focal squamous metaplasia can also be present. Stroma is loose, edematous, along with chronic inflammation in endocervical glands. This is, we are talking about endocervical polyps. We can also have ectocervical polyp, which is rare, and there it is lined by keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. Normally it is not keratinized, it is, we should just say surface stratified squamous epithelium, but if it is protruding outward, it might become keratinized. Now this is the endocervical polyp showing a polypoid projection lined by mucinous columnar epithelium with basally located nucleus. So here you can see that it is lined by columnar epithelium with basally located nucleus. Subepithelially, this is called as stroma. Anything below the epithelium is called as stroma. Now here the stroma has lots of vessels here, small capillaries which are congested, that is filled with RBCs. In between you can find some loose areolar spaces, that is edema in a spindle cellular loose stroma. Along with that you can also find some endocervical gland. So this is endocervical polyp lined by endocervical epithelium on all sides. So endocervix is usually lined by mucinous columnar epithelium and ectocervix is lined by surface stratified squamous epithelium. So here this is a polypoid fragment which is lined by squamous epithelium. Okay, so here we see a squamous epithelium showing multiple layer, that is called as stratification of the epithelium. It is not keratinized as such. It can be keratinized if it is exposed to outside. So here also the stroma shows lots of thin walled vessel as well as spindle cell stroma. So this is ectocervical polyp lined by surface stratified squamous epithelium on all the sides. Coming to the cervical intraepithelial neoplasia, which is also called as CIN, it deals with dysplasia. Dysplasia means bad molding. It has been commonly used for atypical cytological changes in the layers of squamous epithelium, and these changes progress over time. CIN is an alternative classification which is given to various grades of dysplasia and carcinoma in situ. So together, this various grades of dysplasia and carcinoma in situ are classified into cervical intraepithelial neoplasia. Now, this cervical intraepithelial neoplasia is divided into three types: 1, 2, and 3. So, according to this concept, criteria is the proportion or the thickness of the epithelium which is involved. If it is CIN1, then it represents that less than 1/3 involvement of the epithelium is there. That's called as mild dysplasia. CIN2 means 1/3 to 2/3 involvement, which is moderate dysplasia. And CIN3 is full thickness involvement by the dysplastic cell, which is equivalent to carcinoma in situ. It also corresponds to severe dysplasia and carcinoma in situ. Now, according to Bethesda system, cervical intraepithelial neoplasia is again divided into low-grade squamous intraepithelial neoplasia and high-grade squamous intraepithelial neoplasia. The low-grade squamous intraepithelial neoplasia is caused by 6 and 11 strains of HPV. Important microscopic feature of LSIL is squalocytic atypia, that is perinuclear halo and shrunken nucleus, and flat condyloma. So just now we have read about condyloma acuminata. So same thing happens because of HPV 6 and 11 cytopathic effects. The HSIL is caused by 16 and 18 strains of HPV, which is also responsible for carcinoma in situ and squamous cell carcinoma of the cervix. Morphology wise, it shows severe dysplasia, moderate to severe dysplasia actually, and severe dysplasia is also included, similar to carcinoma in situ. So here we see the entire full thickness of the epithelium might be involved in severe dysplasia, and if only 1/3 to 2/3 is involved, that comes under moderate dysplasia. So now you see three types of CIN is there: CIN1, 2, and 3. 1 is mild dysplasia, 2 is moderate dysplasia, and 3 is severe dysplasia and carcinoma in situ. Same thing if you want to put it under Bethesda, then CIN1 comes under LSIL and 2 and 3 comes under HSIL. The morphological features are usually non-specific picture, but the atypia begins at the squamo-columnar junction mostly, or the transitional zone. Transitional zone is something which comes between the endocervix and the ectocervical lining. So the stratified squamous epithelium, when it gets converted into columnar epithelium, so there's a zone of change that's called as transition zone. The diagnosis can be suspected clinically on the basis of Schiller's test done on the bedside. Schiller's test is basically when the ectocervix and endocervix is painted by Lugol's iodine. So this Lugol's iodine will stain the outer ectocervix as dark brown because of the glycogen present in the cells. The endocervix will stain as normal in color because the Lugol's iodine is not taken up by the endocervix. So whenever there is a suspicion of any dysplasia in the ectocervix, then in the Schiller's test, instead of staining dark brown, the ectocervix will stain either white or yellow. That represents abnormal ectocervix. Okay, so this grayish colored thing is ectocervix. This is the transition zone, which is just like a line between the reddish endocervix and the pale colored ectocervix. And this reddish mucosa is endocervix again. Microscopically, as I've already said, the mild, moderate and severe dysplasia differ only in the level of thickness of the epithelium involved. So in mild dysplasia, the abnormal cells extend up to 1/3 thickness from the basal cells to the surface layer. In moderate dysplasia, up to 2/3 of the epithelium is involved. In severe dysplasia, these cells extend from 75 to 90% thickness of the epithelium. In carcinoma in situ, the entire thickness from the basement membrane to the surface shows dysplastic cell. So what is dysplasia? Dysplasia means there should be 4 things at least you should remember. First thing is the loss of polarity. Loss of polarity means the nucleus orients in different direction. Like some nucleus will be suppose this is one of the nucleus, okay, so this is mostly in upward direction. Then if you see this nucleus, it is mostly in the other direction, and this nucleus is slightly horizontal. So there is loss of polarity, which is very important for calling it as dysplasia. Besides that, you should have features of anaplasia, like you should have hyperchromatism, pleomorphism of the nucleus, and prominent coarse chromatin should be there. Eventually it will become coarse in severe dysplasia. And one more thing is, in all the cervical intraepithelial neoplasia, the basement membrane will be intact. The atypical cells won't cross the basement membrane. So suppose this is normal cervix showing the ectocervix, and whatever is there here is the stroma. So here these are showing non-keratinized squamous cell, mostly filled with glycogen. That's why they have this clear appearance. And as you go down, there's 1 or 2 cell layer of basal cell, 1 or 2 cell thickness of the basal cell layer. Now in low grade dysplasia, or you can call it as mild dysplasia or LSIL, what happens here is only 1/3 of the epithelium is involved. So when 1/3 of the epithelium is involved, it is called as CIN1. Mind you, it is the lower 1/3, not the upper 1/3. Okay. Now if we get at least 2/3 of the epithelium is involved, it is called as CIN2. And when the entire thickness of the epithelium is involved, it is CIN3. these two comes under LSIL. Oh, sorry. These two comes under HSIL, and the CIN1 comes under LSIL. HSIL is very drastic. Okay, it can come out as it can convert into carcinoma in situ, or it can invade the erode the basement membrane and invade the stroma as well. Exfoliative cytology of cervix is also called as Pap smear. Pap smear is a practice where all the cells of the ectocervix which are exfoliated is taken on a smear, on a slide, glass slide, and a special stain known as Pap stain is done, which stains all the squamous cells in different colors. 3 types of squamous cells are present coming from the ectocervix in Pap smear. Most predominantly are the superficial cells, okay, and besides superficial cells, the next common is intermediate cells. So depending upon the age group, their number varies. The superficial cells will have small pycnotic nucleus with abundant eosinophilic cytoplasm, and mostly angulated borders will be there. The intermediate cell will have slightly rounded border and cyanophilic cytoplasm, that is bluish cytoplasm will be there. And sometimes you can also find small parabasal cells if the age group is if the patient belongs to old age. So now in LSIL or CIN1 we see that the dysplastic cells usually show pleomorphic nuclei, but it is mildly pleomorphic, and it has a typical coilocytic appearance. In this we cannot appreciate, but here perinuclear halo will be there, or clearing will be there in the cells. So that's called as coilocytic change, which will be very prominent in the LSIL. In the CIN2, now the pleomorphism will increase, so the sizes will vary drastically, but it won't occupy more than 2/3 of the cytoplasm. They will be altered NC ratio, moderate nuclear dyskeratosis, and as we go to CIN3, the nucleus will occupy more than 2/3 of the cytoplasm, so high increased NC ratio will be there. Rounded parabasal cell like cells will be there, and here the nuclei will be having irregular borders. So individual dysplastic or abnormal cells in these grades of ATPR show various cytological changes such as crowding of cells, pleomorphism, high NC ratio, coarse and irregular nuclear chromatin, numerous mitosis, and scattered dyskaryotic cells. Now coming to the pathogenesis of cervical cancer, there are certain major risk factors like early age at coitus, multiple sexual partners, high risk male sex partner. So all these age group as well as the habits are involved with high chance of getting an HPV infection. This HPV will cause some epithelial changes in the basal cells of the squamous epithelium, and all the changes will start in the basal cells. If the HPV is of a low risk type, that is 6 and 11 strain, then it will cause an episomal infection. Episomal infection means, suppose there is a host cell and there is a nucleus here, host nucleus. So here the viral viral, what do you say, DNA will be present separately. It won't integrate into the host nucleus. But if it is infected, or if the cells are infected with high risk HPV types like 16, 18, 31, 33, 52 and 58, what happens here is this HPV will now integrate with the host DNA. So here you can find a part of HPV integrating with the host DNA. So because of this integration, the CIN1 will start. If it is low risk type, it will just cause episomal infection, or there will be benign tumors like condyloma acuminata, which will regress slowly, or if removed will not recur. But here, because of integration, because of high risk type of HPV, which causes integration of their DNA into the host DNA, the CIN will occur, and because of this CIN, they will be persistent of HPV infection. Normally, if CIN1 is there, it might also convert into normal, or there might be clearance of the virus if the immunity is good. But if the immunity is reduced, or if there is continuous persistence of the HPV infection, basically high risk HPV infection, and if there is any immunosuppression like cigarette smoking women, uses of oral contraceptive, HIV infection, immunosuppression, and sometimes lower immunity because of low socioeconomic conditions, multiparous women, all these have this additional factors which will cause persistence of HPV infection, and that will lead to CIN2 and 3 or high grade cervical intraepithelial lesion. If this is superimposed by inactivation of suppressor genes like P53 and retinoblastoma gene, that will cause activation of cyclin E, which will increase the proliferation of the cells, causing invasive cervical cancer. Besides that, the cofactors which I have already mentioned can also act as promoters. Invasive cervical cancer incidence is declining in developed countries in the last 50 years due to increased use of pap smear technique for early detection and diagnosis. But the incidence remains high in developing countries with low socioeconomic status. The risk factors and the causative agents are same in both developing and developed countries. So maybe the immunosuppressive state plays an important role here. The peak incidence of invasive cervical cancer is in 4th to 6th decades of life. If we see grossly, invasive carcinoma may present 3 types. It can present as a fungating or exophytic growth, which will appear as a cauliflower-like growth infiltrating the vaginal walls, and this is the most common type of occurrence. It arises mostly from the squamo-columnar junction of the cervix, and the advanced stage of the disease is characterized by widespread destruction and infiltration of the adjacent structures like the vagina. It can spread to the adjacent uterus, to the urinary bladder and the lymph nodes as well. So this is the gross picture of the cervical cancer infiltrating into the adjacent uterine tissue. So this shows replacement of the cervix by irregular grey-white fibril growth extending into the cervical canal as well as distally into the vaginal cuff. As I said, 80% of the cervical cancers are squamous cell carcinoma or epidermoid carcinoma. 70 to 80% you can say. Any squamous cell carcinoma is same no matter where it occurs, whether it is occurring in skin or cervix, anywhere in the body, it is of same type. Same time in the sense, same type of differentiations will be there, that is well differentiated or moderately differentiated or poorly differentiated. So all the features and the factors will be same. Well differentiating keratinizing epidermoid carcinoma mostly will have keratin pearls and nests of squamous cells infiltrating the stroma surrounded by desmoplastic stromal reaction. This will be somewhat like this. It might be a microcarcinoma just invading 1 millimeter into the stroma, but it is surrounded by a desmoplastic reaction here, or it might be fully invasive like this, infiltrating as in the form of nests and islands with attempt to keratin pearl formation. Okay, and abundant inflammatory infiltrate can be seen in the stroma. So this is a good example of well differentiated squamous cell carcinoma. So here you can see how the HSIL can convert into a microinvasive squamous cell carcinoma. Besides the well differentiated, we have moderately differentiating, non-keratinizing large cell types, small cell undifferentiated carcinoma, which is also called as neuroendocrine or oat cell carcinoma. The adenocarcinoma accounts for 20 to 25% of the cases, and these may be well differentiated mucus secreting adenocarcinoma or clear cell type containing glycogen but no mucin. So the remaining 5% are a variety of other patterns such as adenosquamous, verrucous and undifferentiated carcinoma. Coming to the endometrial pathology. So this is a normal endometrium showing a tubular endometrium gland lined by pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium. This is how it looks. Pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium. And this is the stroma showing small round to oval, sometimes spindle shaped cells can be there, and this is how a stroma of endometrium will look like. So glands and stroma constitute normal endometrium. Besides that, you can have some congested vessels or extravasated RBCs here. So this gland, these two glands will have certain ratio of stroma that should be present for each gland. Okay, so that gland to stromal ratio has to be maintained, and that is important in hyperplasia. So what is endometriosis? When these endometrial glands and stroma is important here, not just glands. So when these endometrial glands and stroma are present in abnormal location. What do you mean by abnormal? Normally, where is it located? In the endometrium. So if it is located anywhere besides the endometrium, it is called as endometriosis. Outside the uterus, you can call it. Okay, so it can occur in the ovary. That endometrium can occur. Endometrial glands and stroma can occur in the uterine ligaments, rectovaginal septum, pelvic peritoneum, laparotomy scars, and infrequently in the umbilicus, vagina, vulva, appendix and hernial sacs. So why is it occurring? What is the occurrence here? So there's a histogenesis of endometriosis which was proposed, and several theories were proposed regarding the same. The first one was regurgitation theory, second is benign metastatic theory, the third is metaplastic theory, and fourth is extrauterine stem cell progenitor cell theory. So the three theories are important among these. First one is regurgitation theory or transplantation theory. So this is based based on the assumption that ectopic endometrial tissue is transplanted from the uterus to abnormal location by fallopian tubes through regurgitation of the menstrual blood. So fallopian tube is considered as a pathway. Metaplastic theory suggests that ectopic endometrium develops in situ from local tissues by metaplasia of the coelomic epithelium. So here what is the cause? Metaplasia of coelomic epithelium. Third theory is vascular or lymphatic dissemination, which explains that the development of endometrial tissue at extrapelvic sites are by the route of vessels or lymphatics. So these three theories at least we should remember: transplantation theory, metaplastic theory, and dissemination theory. The clinical signs and symptoms include intrapelvic bleeding from implants, severe dysmenorrhea, pelvic pain, dyspareunia, and infertility. Grossly, the appearance of endometriosis varies widely depending upon the location and the extent of the disease. So typically the foci of endometriosis appears as brownish black luminous filled with brownish black material, and often these foci are surrounded by fibrous tissue resulting in adherence of adjacent structure. Now if you take ovary, this is an example of ovary. So how can we identify that this is ovary? First of all, it is a round structure with small cystic things like here. So we can assume that this is ovary because of the presence of follicle-like structures, and one of the cysts have converted into a large dilated cyst, and this cyst is filled with chocolate-like material. That's why it is called as chocolate cyst of the ovary. So it is the most common site of endometriosis and shows numerous cysts of varying diameters which will be filled with chocolate-like material. It can range up to 0.1 to 3.5 centimeter as well. So what is this chocolate cyst? This chocolate cyst is nothing but the hemorrhage which is happening because of menstruation in the ectopic endometrial glands will be loculated and trapped inside that cyst. So that will become chocolatey. Microscopically, the endometriosis shows ectopic presence of endometrial glands as well as the stroma, along with areas of hemorrhages. Hemorrhage is nothing but extravasation of red blood cells. Now these red blood cells, when they will be taken up by the macrophages, they will become as hemosiderin laden macrophages, because hemosiderin is the digestive product of the red blood cell. So that will be taken up by the macrophages and they become brownish in color, which is hemosiderin laden macrophages. Now this hemosiderin laden macrophages, if they are present in any tissue along with the endometrial gland, then it is highly suggestive of endometriosis. Sometimes even if the endometrial glands are not there, and if there is a suspicion of endometriosis, so presence of hemosiderin laden macrophages along with stromal cells may suggest the presence of endometriosis as well. This will be surrounded by zone of inflammation, and suppose this is a microscopic picture of a scar abdomen. Mostly it can be a pregnancy scar or cesarean scar, sorry. So in the cesarean scar, sometimes the endometrial tissue might get implanted, and that might lead to the presence of endometriosis of the scar tissue. Endometrial hyperplasias is a condition characterized by proliferative patterns of glandular and stromal components of the endometrium. So endometrium has the glands and the stroma which is present in a certain ratio which has to be maintained. If there is any increase in the gland to stromal ratio, then it is called as endometrial hyperplasia, Mostly this occurs because of hormonal stimulation like prolonged estrogenic stimulation, which is unopposed by progestational activity. So this occurs in conditions like Steen-Leventhal syndrome, functioning granulosa theca cell tumors, adrenocortical hyperfunction, and prolonged administration of estrogen. The following classification of endometrial hyperplasias is widely employed by most gynecological pathologists. The first one is non-atypical hyperplasia. So this non-atypical hyperplasia now includes simple hyperplasia without atypia, which was also labeled as cystic glandular hyperplasia. Then complex hyperplasia without atypia, which is also called as complex non-atypical hyperplasia. Then there is only one atypical hyperplasia, which is complex hyperplasia with atypia. It is also called as complex atypical hyperplasia. So 3 types mostly. The simple hyperplasia without atypia is also called as cystic glandular hyperplasia. This form of endometrial hyperplasia is characterized by presence of varying size of glands, endometrial glands. But these are large and cystically dilated, somewhat like this. This is the normal endometrial gland. Okay, so you can take this for reference, and you can compare this dilated, cystically dilated gland, and this will be lined by mostly flattened to pseudostratified columnar epithelium. Along with that, there will be stratification, means increase in the layers of cells will be there in the epithelium. What happens to the stroma? Stroma will become compact, means the cells in the stroma, spindle cells, will be closely arranged to each other. So this is a normal stroma. Here it will become more compact and dark in color. So mitosis is scanty, but there is no atypia, and the stroma between the glands is sparsely cellular and edematous. So compact is the word for hyperplasia, but sometimes in simple hyperplasia without atypia you can see edematous stroma as well. This is a picture showing complex hyperplasia without atypia. So what happens in complex hyperplasia without atypia? There will be increase in the glands when compared to the stroma. So they exhibit variation in size and they will be irregular in shape. Here they will be nicely round in shape, but here they will be irregular in shape, and they are lined by multiple layers of tall columnar epithelial cells. This also shows stratification. Stratification means they are arranged at different levels and in multiple layers, but still the polarity is intact. I told you earlier about the polarity. Polarity means the orientation of the long axis of the nucleus, so that is maintained. It is not lost, and the nuclear features also is bland. So no atypia here also. So that's why it is called as complex. Complex why? Because irregular shape of the glands as well as very closely spaced glands. It is more closely spaced than the simple non-atypical hyperplasia glands. Okay, so papillary folds, infolding, back-to-back glands, and dense stroma will be there in complex non-atypical hyperplasia. Now similarly, in complex hyperplasia with atypia, the only difference we see is the cytological atypia being present in the cells of this complex glands. So here by atypical cells, what do we mean? By atypical features, we mean that there will be loss of polarity, there will be large size of the nucleus, irregular nuclear borders, hyperchromatic nuclei, and prominent nucleoli. So here we can see that the center of the cells show prominent nucleoli, and altered NC ratio will be there. So this is complex hyperplasia with atypia. The malignant potential of complex hyperplasia in the absence of cytological atypia is 3%, and complex atypical hyperplasia is a precancerous condition. Its malignant transformation is related to degree of cytological atypia. So 20 to 25% progress to endometrial cancer. Most common invasive cancer of the female genital tract is endometrium cancer. It is primarily a disease of postmenopausal women and peak at 60 to 70 years or 6th to 7th decade of life. Presenting complaint is mostly in the form of abnormal uterine bleeding in postmenopausal women. So whenever the clinical question will be asked as postmenopausal bleeding in a 60-year-old female. So either it should be cervical cancer or it should be endometrial cancer. That should be the first thing which comes to our mind. Grossly, endometrial carcinoma will have two patterns: localized polypoid tumor or a diffuse tumor. The diffuse is more common. Now, tumor will be seen as protruding into the endometrial cavity as irregular, friable, grey-tan mass, and sometimes it might extend into the adjacent soft tissues like myometrium. An extension of the growth into the myometrium is identified by the presence of soft, friable, granular tissue in the cut section. It can also spread through lymphatics or hematogenous route to lungs, liver, bones and organs. So here this polypoid growth has occupied just the fundus, whereas the diffuse growth has occupied the entire lining of the endometrium. So this is diffuse type and this is a polypoid type of endometrial cancer. Histologically, most endometrial carcinomas are adenocarcinomas, commonly termed as endometrioid adenocarcinoma due to their resemblance with normal endometrium. Depending upon the pattern of the glands and the individual cells in those individual cells forming those glands, they may be classified into well differentiated, moderately differentiated and poorly differentiated, or as G1, G2 and G3. So well differentiated endometrial carcinoma is also called as grade 1. There will be increase in the number of glands which are closely packed. Back-to-back crowding will be there and there will be obliteration of the intervening stroma. So these glands resembling normal endometrium will be present, but there will be stratification and tufting and papillae formation will be there. So this is how a endometrioid, well differentiated endometrioid carcinoma will look like. Mostly they will be like irregular, closely spaced glands, and this is a focus showing very scant intervening stroma between the glands, which are almost like papillary projections or finger-like projections are there, and those are seen infiltrating the muscle bundles. So this is a muscle bundle. Moderately differentiated carcinoma is similar to well differentiated, but there'll also be some solid nests of the malignant cells. Poorly differentiated will show just the presence of solid sheets. Sometimes you can see ribbons of the epithelial cells. Very rarely we see glandular formation. There will be marked atypia in the cells along with frequent mitosis. Coming to the myometrium. So myometrium, the benign tumor of myometrium is leiomyoma. It is the most frequently asked question. If the examiner is very fond of asking repeated question, then he will definitely ask you leiomyoma. It is also called as fibroids in common language or gynecologics language. It is the most common uterine tumor of smooth muscle origin. 20% women above the age of 30 years will harbor this, and it can range from varying size. They can be ranging from 1 millimeter to 10 centimeter as well. Most common clinical feature here will be abnormal uterine bleeding again, along with an abdominal mass causing pressure symptoms and pain because it causes compression of the surrounding structures. Infertility is another most common finding. The cause is mostly again because of proliferation of the cells under the influence of unopposed estrogen, and usually in pregnancy it will increase in size. It can occur in three spaces in the uterus. One is within the myometrium, that is called as intramural or interstitial. Next is the serosal. Serosa is the outermost covering of the uterus. So if it is present just below the serosa, then it is called as subserosal. If it is present just underneath the endometrial lining, then it is called as submucosal. The subserosal submucosal leiomyomas may develop pedicles and protrude as pedunculated myomas. So this is how it is. This is the endometrial cavity. These are the fallopian tube cavity. So this will open into proper endometrial cavity until the cervical os. Now after this, just between the lips of the cervix until the endocervix is the endocervical canal, and the lowermost part is the vaginal walls. So this endocervical and endometrial cavity is lined by epithelium. Okay, so just beneath the endometrial lining, if there is occurrence of fibroid, it is called as submucosal fibroid. The middle lining of the uterus is called as myometrium. So if it occurs within the myometrium, it is called as intramural fibroid. Outermost lining of the uterus is called as serosa. So that if it is present, if the fibroid is present just beneath the serosa, it is called as subserosal. So this is a picture showing a pregnant uterus with an adjacent big fibroid or leiomyoma compressing the developing fetus. Microscopically, it is essentially composed of two elements. First, there will be whorled bundles of smooth muscles admixed with connective tissue. The smooth muscle cells are uniform in size, like almost every cell will appear same, and they will be having this elongated cigar shaped nucleus and spindle shape of the cells with abundant eosinophilic cytoplasm, and central elongated nucleus will be there. They will be arranged in the form of whorls. Sometimes we can have some secondary changes like hyaline changes in the center of the whorls. Secondary changes can also include hyaline degeneration, cystic degeneration, infarction. So this is a diagram showing hyaline change here. You can also see infection in a fibroid along with suppuration, necrosis, fatty change, and very rarely a malignant transformation can occur in a leiomyoma causing sarcomatous change. Adenomyosis is abnormal distribution of histologically benign endometrial tissue within the myometrium. Earlier we had discussed about endometriosis. So what is endometriosis? It is the presence of histologically benign endometrial tissue outside the uterus. Adenomyosis means histologically benign endometrial tissue. It is present usually in any side besides the endometrium, mostly in the myometrium. Okay, so myometrium is important in adenomyosis. So endometrium and myometrium are very closely spaced or very closely opposed. So how can we differentiate whether that endometrial glands are not belonging to endometrial lining but the myometrium? So adenomyoma is used for actually circumscribed mass made up of endometrium and smooth muscle. This abnormal distribution of the Endometrial tissue will occur again because of metaplasia or estrogenic stimulation due to endocrine dysfunction of the ovary. Clinically, there will be menorrhagia, colicky, dysmenorrhea, and menstrual pain in the sacral or sacrococcygeal area. Grossly, we cannot differentiate it, but there will be some evidence of presence of trabeculae, which represents the hyperplastic myometrium. So there will be hyperplastic smooth muscles around the spots of adenomyosis. So can you see the dark spots here? That will represent the adenomyosis focus. Microscopically, how to say whether it is not an extension of the endometrium, but a separate gland present in the myometrium. So we see in low power, if in low power it crosses the diameter of the lens, or one field. If it is present beyond one field in 10x, then it is called as adenomyosis. That means it is very far from the endometrium to be called as a part of endometrium. So normal benign endometrial islands composed of glands as well as stroma, both should be there, but within the myometrial bundles. They will be associated myometrial hypertrophy present around it.